Hey everyone, my name is Joel Stegman. I'm one of the pastors here at Resurrection City Church, and we're in a series that we're calling Stay Salty right now at Res City. We're in week 2 of it. Last week we really dove into kind of the idea behind it, which is about why we think it's actually important for us as Christians to embrace what makes us seem weird to the world around us, to really actually find identity and confidence in that. Because we talked about why Jesus' idea that we are to be what he calls the salt of the world, where we hear and listen to the teaching of Jesus and we live it out. When we do that, we actually become people who can flavor and preserve the world around us. That's what salt does. And we can do that even though we're weird because of it. Actually, our weirdness is what helps us to do those things that Jesus calls us to. And that's kind of the whole idea behind this series, is talking about some of those things that do kind of make us seem weird to the world around us and why we shouldn't be afraid of it and kind of, sand down the edges of that a little bit, but be willing to embrace it. Now, one of the more important parts of accessing this weird and transformative power of the Christian faith is, I think, and this is kind of obvious, but it's actually knowing it. Like, what is it about what we believe that is maybe weird to us and to the world around us? And I think the reality is a lot of Christians maybe don't even understand a lot of the basics of what they believe. And that's actually another reason I thought it was good for us to do this series, because I think it's a chance for us to kind of expose ourselves to some of the basics of Christian belief and doctrine that maybe we might not know a whole lot about. And so let me just give you an example of one of those things that is very kind of foundational to Christianity, but a lot of Christians don't even really know it. There was a survey done in 2022 by Ligonier Ministries and Lifeway Research, and they called it the State of Theology Survey. And they asked a bunch of evangelicals very basic questions about what they believe to see how much they actually knew about some of those basics of their faith. And let's just say if this were an Olympic qualifying round to get into for some event, a lot of these people would not have qualified, unfortunately. And I think one of the most alarming results from the people who conducted the survey, and to me as a pastor reading it later on, was that almost three-fourths of the people surveyed agreed with this statement, that Jesus was the first and greatest thing that God created. Now, the problem with that is that Christians don't believe that Jesus was created. See, Mormons believe that, and Muslims believe that, but it's not what Christians believe. It's not a basic Christian belief. And I thought that topic might actually be a good place to kind of really dive in to this series. Because the reality is that Christians hold to something else, that Jesus wasn't created by God, but instead this. We read this in John 1:14, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us." And so the idea that we're going to talk about this morning is Jesus as true God and true human. Okay, this is one of the most fundamental beliefs of the Christian doctrine, that the eternal and spiritual creator God clothed himself in the material of his crowning achievement, which is humanity. He gave himself a skeleton. He kind of filled around that skeleton with organs and muscles. He covered it in skin and hair and kind of allowed himself to be bathed in the emotions and the experience of being embodied, of being a human in all that. And that mix of human and divine was the historical person, Jesus of Nazareth. Now, we call this the incarnation. So word you hear a lot at Christmas time, for example, to describe this reality. And that's what we're talking about. That's what this is. Now, on top of maybe not knowing this, I think the reality is that even more people who don't know this basic truth of Christian doctrine might not be able, or they might not also to be able to explain like the meaning behind why God chose to do this. And so it's really crucial to understand. And what I want to talk about in this message is what it means, why it's weird to our world, and then why it matters. Why believing it, knowing it, and trying to figure out how to kind of live out the implications of it is going to make us salty in God's world. Okay, that'll be kind of the roadmap for this message that we're going to study this morning. Okay? So let's hop in, first of all, to this first part, what it means. Jesus is fully God and fully human. Okay? Now, I actually think the Catholic Church Catechism is kind of helpful to plainly lay out this idea because there are things that Catholics and Protestants disagree on, but this is one thing that we're in full agreement on traditionally. Okay? So this is how it reads in the Catechism. It says, the unique and altogether singular event of the incarnation of the Son of God does not mean that Jesus Christ is part God and part man, nor does it imply that he is the result of a confused mixture of the divine and the human. He became truly man while remaining truly God. Jesus Christ is true God and true man. All right, so let me unpack kind of some of the different parts of that for you, okay? First off, this is a one-time event. Okay, that's a unique and singular thing that happened only once in history. God came down in the person of Jesus. He did the ministry of Jesus. He died. He was raised again, and actually Jesus ascended into heaven. This is where this still sort of incarnate God rests is now at the right hand of the Father in heaven, kind of back in the triune sort of relationship fully in heaven that they had before it took place. And Jesus is not part God and part human. Okay, the Catechism says this. That's a way of saying that Jesus is not like a spiritual golden doodle, right? A kind of mashup of two breeds of being, right? Like half golden retriever, half doodle, very popular to make breeds of dog like this. But that's not what this means, right? It's not like, Jesus had a dad who was God and a mom who was human, making him like a demigod in the Greek pantheon, someone like Hercules. He was at all times truly God in fullness, while at the same time being fully human, okay? Now that's a little bit confusing. It's a little bit mysterious, and so people think that can't be right? And one of the ways that some people kind of early in the church's history tried to make sense of it was something called docetism, right? So here's if you're looking to learn a big theological word, there you go. The idea behind that was that essentially God must have presented himself as kind of like a hologram on earth that mimicked being a real human, seemed in every way to be a real human, but wasn't. Okay? Again, this is untrue. This is not how Christians have understood it for the last 2,000 years. Now, it's a bit of a brain twister how exactly this all has played out, and we have to admit it requires us to be okay with some mystery here, okay? Even if we are going to maybe offer some theories as to what this means, how it would have actually physically played out, we have to kind of be okay with being a little bit in the dark as to what it actually meant for this to be a reality. But it's kind of a clear conclusion when you really study the scriptures that this is what's taking place. So it's an absolutely essential thing for us to believe. Okay, so why is it weird? What makes this so weird in the world around us? Aside from the science of it, which we can only really speculate about, I think here's what's the weirdest part about this in the world today. Okay, we all know that human bodies are finite and they're very limited, right? Maybe you're young enough and healthy enough to where you haven't seen that happen really to your own body, but you do know someone who does. I guarantee you, right? People who are aging and are starting to see the effects of it on their body now. Maybe someone who has chronic disease or had some injury that they have to live with really for the rest of their life. Okay, now we would think, because of the nature of being embodied as a human and all the limitations that come with it, that it would be a sign of progress to transcend these kinds of limitations and go from humanity to godhood, to kind of leave our humanity and embodiedness specifically behind. Okay, and there's actually, for example, like a really kind of a movement. I don't know how popular it is, but it's popular enough that a lot of people are trying to engage in it in some way. It's called the transhumanism movement, and the idea is people are trying to figure out how they can use technology and the science of how bodies work and how to take care of your body well to try to live almost forever in some people's cases. Like that's really their goal, is to never allow the effects of embodiedness to overtake them. And the weird thing about the incarnation is it's actually God working this in reverse from the way we assume it would happen, okay? Because he starts out in the position of divinity, not bound and limited by embodiedness, and he willingly and intentionally takes on human flesh. He sees that as actually a form of progress to his intended goal. Okay, so actually think about what this means with me here for just a moment. Okay, we can assume that Jesus of Nazareth, again, this historical person for whom being fully God and fully human at the same time was his reality, because he was fully human, he had at least some of the annoying things that we have with our human bodies, right? Like he probably got sick at some point. He probably got sick and had to deal with a cold or something annoying like that. Maybe he broke a bone when he was a kid. He was playing with some other kids and he broke his leg or something. Maybe he was nearsighted. Maybe he had flat feet. Maybe he had acne. Right? We do know for sure that Jesus got tired and hungry at times. There are stories about this. There's one where he's in a boat one time. He's trying to take a nap after a long day of teaching, and a storm kind of interrupts his nap, and he seems downright grumpy about it. Right? I can't think of anything more human than that, although what happens next in the story is certainly him tapping into the divine part of him. He told the storm to shut up, and it did, which is not a very human thing to experience. Okay, we know that Jesus couldn't be everywhere at once, and it seems like there were times where he was being, asked by many, many, many people in a crowd to heal and deliver them from demons. That he was limited by the same things that we are, by time and by his ability to actually go to one person at a time, by his energy. Right? He had these constraints on him that didn't allow him to do everything he wanted to do at once. And of course, as we all know, he was killed. Why would you take these kinds of things on when you didn't have to? It just doesn't really make a lot of sense when you think about it in our world today, right? And remember that group of people I talked about a little bit earlier, people who kind of couldn't fathom that Jesus was really human, so they thought he must have been like a hologram. Okay, now in the early in the time of the early church, people like that were called Gnostics. Okay, or they were part of a movement which we would call today Gnosticism, right? And these people had a major problem with God being human for some of the reasons that we talked about, right? For them, kind of in the world that they lived in, it made a lot of sense that the spiritual world, they saw a strict dualism in the world between what is spiritual and what is material and physical, and they thought what is spiritual is inherently good, and what is material and physical is inherently bad, or sometimes they would even say evil, right? And so for them, what's important about a person is their soul, that you're basically trapped in the prison of the natural physical world, and our bodies would be, to use a very modern term, these sort of inefficient meat suits that are keeping us from living the spiritual life that we want to. Okay, and the idea that God would enter into physical existence rather than escaping it would be very foolish to them. Okay, now I think in the world that we live in, we are finding ourselves more and more living in what we could call like a digital kind of Gnosticism, right? Because we live so much of our lives mediated by machines and tied into digital existence and realities rather than our embodied ones. Sometimes we would rather inhabit these digital spaces rather than the physical ones. Okay, it's why this phrase, you need to go touch grass, exists, right? It kind of reminds people that you need to get out, you need to unplug yourself from this digital world and go to a place that is physical and really matters. Don't live your life thinking that what is real is what's being mediated to by your screen, and where everything is really at the end of the day just ones and zeros. Okay? This is becoming a harder and harder thing for us, I think, to do in our world. Right? And the effects of this are only going to accelerate. I actually saw something here recently that kind of, I think maybe could be a preview of how this kind of plays out in the world for us. It was something that the CEO of ChatGPT, a guy named Sam Altman, said recently. He'd been asked about some criticism of AI, that it takes a ton of electricity to build these massive facilities to train and house AI servers, okay, because AI needs to be trained on data, and it's very expensive to do that while it develops. So he's kind of come under some criticism for that. And he responded that actually, if you think about it, it's really nothing compared to the amount of time and resources that are poured into a human to be able to get smart enough to do anything valuable like AI does. essentially, right? He said it takes 20 plus years for a human to go to school and learn to be trained in order to do these things that AI do. And he says, like, how much food and electricity and, resources and time was needed to get them to that place over that 20 plus year span, right? No, I don't know deep down Sam Altman's sort of personal feelings on the value of humans and our limitations and giving him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he wasn't trying to make this point, but it sure kind of seems like the rationale that you can definitely see perhaps catching on in some spaces in our world is that we would start to think that human embodiedness is not a good thing. It's a problem to be solved. And in a world where this is becoming more and more common, I think God choosing to be embodied is really important. I think it should sort of grab our attention that this is what God chose to do. It tells us that God sees goodness in the embodied humanness that we all inhabit, right? That he still says that what he initially created is still good. It is worth continuing it and keeping it going. Right? It explains God's commitment to redemption, his commitment to second chances for creation, rather than letting it crumble and fall apart and start over again. Right? And so this gets us into the idea of sort of why does Jesus as human and God fully matter? Okay? Why does this matter? Okay? Let's start with the thing I just highlighted. Okay, I think especially of those who are, people who are affected by some chronic disease, perhaps, who live with this very present reminder of the limited nature of our bodies and the mortality of it, right? Who might even hate your bodies sometimes, right? I just want to offer you a loving encouragement to fight to see your body as good and not worth throwing it into the trash in your opinion of it, and just thinking, I just wish I could be free of this thing. I understand the challenges of it, but I want to say that God sees human embodiedness as good, and I think that there might be a call for you to do that as well, to see your value still as worth value and dignity because God views it that way. Right? God becoming human reminds us of how what he created as good, and your body is something that he created and made good. Okay. Now, there are a lot of other important reasons that we could highlight this to talk about why God becoming flesh matters. And I really wrestled with which ones to highlight. And I think I left some pretty good ones on the cutting room floor. But I settled on some things I really think God put on my heart to include in the message here. And the book of Hebrews is one of the most kind of clear texts that kind of gives us some insight into the mystery of the incarnation and provides a lot of meat for us to sink our teeth into here for the rest of the message. Okay, so let me read to you a few verses from Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. The author of Hebrews says, "Long ago, God spoke many times and in many ways to our ancestors through the prophets. And now in these final days, he's spoken to us through his Son. God promised everything to the Son as an inheritance, and through the Son, he created the universe. The Son radiates God's own glory and expresses the very character of God, and he sustains everything by the mighty power of his command. When he had cleansed us from our sins, he sat down in the place of honor at the right hand of the majestic God in heaven." So here the author of Hebrews is saying that God makes himself clear to us by speaking to us in the form of the embodied person, Jesus. Basically, the author is saying that if we want to know who God is, we start with Jesus. Because what better way for us to have explained to us what God is like than in human terms, in ways we can understand because we ourselves are human, okay? The author of Hebrews says that Jesus radiates God's own glory and expresses his character to us. And I think there's a really good principle in there for us to file away for ourselves when questions or doubts about who God is, what his character is like, maybe passages of the Bible that we read that are confusing to us and make us kind of not sure what God is up to or what it says about God, to start with Jesus. Okay, that is what God himself wants you to do, and read the rest of the Bible in the light of his most full revelation to us in the person of Jesus. Okay, but God tells us a lot more than just who he is through Jesus. There's a lot more layers to it that I want us to continue to explore here. Okay, so for example, later in the book of Hebrews in chapter 12, the author explains to us why we need to focus on the incarnate God as we live the race, as the author puts it, of being a Christian. Okay, we read this in Hebrews 12, verses 1 to 2. And let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. All right, there are two things in that passage that I want to really highlight here. Okay, first of all, Jesus is the champion who initiates our faith. And secondly, Jesus is the perfecter. The Greek word there is teleiotes, which comes from a word sort of having to do with fulfillment or design. Okay, so Jesus is the one who perfects or fulfills or sees the design to our faith through to its end. Okay, now what does that mean? Okay, what does it mean that Jesus is those two things? Well, there was actually an African bishop and writer by the name of Athanasius, a very important person sort of in the history of the church. He lived in kind of the third century of the church's existence, and he spent a lot of time thinking about the incarnation, and he wrote it down in a book called On the Incarnation, not the most clever title perhaps, very quick and to the point. That really helps us to understand what it means that Jesus is our champion and the perfecter of our faith. Okay, so let's take them one at a time here and talk about what Athanasius has to say. Okay, first of all, what does it mean that the incarnate Jesus is the champion and initiator of our faith? Okay, now Athanasius starts by talking about the depths of the problem that humans are in, and talks about how God needs to take very drastic steps in order to do it, and that is why he takes on flesh. It's actually because of the predicament that humans are in. Okay, now to understand what he's saying, let me use a modern analogy to kind of help make sense of it. In Alcoholics Anonymous, there's this saying that's used to remind alcoholics in the program that they need help to get out of their addiction. Okay, they're not going to be able to just think their way through it or push their way through it like we tend to tell ourselves we can do. It's very common among alcoholics to claim that they can figure it on their own. They don't need help in order to get out of sort of the hole of alcoholism that they're in. Okay, and what they tell people in it is your best thinking is what got you here. Okay, your best thinking is not going to get you out of this because that's exactly why you're here in the first place. It's a very humbling thing. It's a very good reminder of why they need help in the middle of their predicament. And I think that's how we are with sin. I think that analogy is very helpful to understanding what Athanasius is saying. Okay, our best thinking is twisted oftentimes by sin, and it keeps us locked in the same tired but destructive habits of sin that lead us into a kind of enslavement by it, and the eternal consequences that we will have to face because of it. We're locked into it. We cannot get out of it on our own. It's like a maximum security prison that we're in with a life sentence in it, right? And our best thinking is not going to help to break us out of it. It's not going to help us come up with an escape plan because that's why we're there in the first place. And that's why we need a rescuer. And this is where Jesus as champion is important, okay? God took on flesh to lead a prison break from the inside. Okay, by taking on flesh just like us, Jesus could kind of sort of entered into the state that humans are in so that he could be in here with us and break us out of it. There was a really kind of, let me mix my analogy here a little bit. There's a very kind of popular show in the mid-2000s called Prison Break. I don't know, how much staying power the show has had, but I do remember it was very popular in that time. And it was about a guy who gets himself convicted of a felony just so he could go to prison and break his brother out, who had been falsely imprisoned in it. And the whole kind of first season, I know, was the unveiling of his plan to break his brother and him out of prison again. Okay, the premise is that he needed to be in prison with his brother in order to break him out. Okay, and Athanasius is saying that in a sense, this is what Jesus has done for us. He actually calls Jesus the pioneer of our faith, right? Who as a human leads other humans to freedom from their sin, something we would not be able to do on our own. Okay? So that's one sort of important reason why Jesus takes on flesh for us. Another one, a second one, is tied to it. And this is the second part of what we read in Hebrews, okay, where we talk about how Jesus is the perfecter of our faith, okay? Now, Athanasius, to explain this point, he starts by saying this: human beings are able to learn from other human beings more directly about higher things. Okay. Now, Athanasius is writing this over 1,500 years ago now, but he's confirming, or he's saying stuff that research today has kind of completely confirmed, and it's made famous by people like Albert Bandura, kind of writing about social cognitive and learning theory, which is basically that we largely learn by observing and imitating the behaviors of especially those we look up to. Okay, this is one of the key ways that we learn what we do about the world. So by taking on flesh, God is in a position to teach us something important, and this is how he can be the perfecter of our faith as well, okay? God took on flesh to show us what it means to be truly human. This is what it means that Jesus is the perfecter of our faith, okay? Let me explain here what Athanasius is saying. The one who led the prison break for us is also the one who is going to teach us how to live in freedom now that we're out of the prison of sin, and to keep us from going back into bondage. Okay? Now, to explain how this works out, Athanasius has this sort of brilliant analogy here that I'm gonna read here for you right now. Okay? He says, you know what happens when a portrait that has been painted on a panel becomes obliterated through external stains. The artist does not throw away the panel, but the subject of the portrait has to come and sit for it again, and then the likeness is redrawn on the same material. Even so it was with the all-holy Son of God. He, the image of the Father, came and dwelt in our midst in order that he might renew mankind made after himself. Okay, so I want to make sure that you catch what he's saying in this analogy because it's really, really, really good. Okay, he says, imagine a wood panel with a portrait painted on it. Okay, it's like a painting now, a canvas or something that gets dirty, gets stained. What do you do if you don't want to, scrap the thing and start over? You bring the person whose image is on it back in, and you repaint it on the wood panel. Okay, it's a prized painting. You don't want to get rid of it. You put a lot of work into it, and so you sort of refresh and renew it again. The theological reality that Athanasius is pointing us to is this. In the beginning, humans were created in the image of God, right? We were made for a glorious and eternal purpose, to be like him and to showcase his likeness to the world, like a portrait of God that has been painted onto some other figure that can share the image of the person that is painted onto it. That is what it means for us to be painted, or to have the image of God onto us. We are God's portrait in a sense that we're supposed to, and to live that out, to take that seriously is what it means to be truly human. But the corrosive effects of sin on us have stained the image in us all. It's confused us all about what it means to be human now. Okay, this is the state, the predicament that we live in. And so to renew our understanding of what it means to be truly human, God brings back the subject of the portrait, the one whose image is on us and who we're supposed to always look like, which is Jesus himself. And he repaints that image back into a portrait for all of us to see clearly again and to help us to know what it means for us to live as we were created to be in the first place. Okay, through learning from another human who is living truly in the image of God and is showing us what it means to be truly human now too. So how does this make us all salty? Okay, how does this sort of make sense to us practically? This has all been very high level. Let me come down to earth a little bit here for us. Okay, the big idea I think for us here in terms of how we can take this into the world we inhabit and be salty with it is that as we live as disciples in the grace and teaching of Jesus, we become more and more like Jesus, and we can help him to show the world how to be human again. Okay, Jesus did a lot of teaching and preaching during his ministry here on earth. And what he would actually do is he would go around and he'd recruit people to become part of this cohort of learners, almost like his university that he was starting, Jesus University, that would learn under him. And he called these people his disciples. Okay, we could also use the words students or apprentices that might help us to understand what he was calling these people to be as well. It's actually one of the main elements of his ministry, and he was kind of playing on a very kind of common understanding of what a rabbi would do in that time. And as this rabbi, as this teacher to his students, he would teach about the depths of reality itself, rooted in God's wisdom, the wisdom that created the entire universe itself. Okay, he had a knowledge about the world that no other teacher had up to that point. This is why he was so compelling as a figure to so many people. Okay, and the people didn't realize this at the time, but the reason is because he was the one who created the world itself. He had the sort of depth of knowledge because he was the one who made it that way in the first place. And what he was doing, as he was teaching them how to live in harmony with the world as it had been created by God the Father, is he was teaching people what it means to be human, since he was the one who made it in the first place. Now, a lot of people today, I don't think, look at Jesus as someone who has a whole lot of, wisdom about the world to offer them. Okay? When people have questions, and this includes Christians, I think, as well, it's not just Jesus, but when people have questions about things like, say, sex and dating, they don't go to Jesus probably, right? They listen to podcasts where people, talk about their successes and failures in relationships and hooking up, right? When people have questions about politics, they don't think, well, how would Jesus approach this? Okay, maybe Jesus becomes a mascot for them in some way, but they're turning oftentimes just to the cable news, talking heads, or political influencers, or maybe worst of all, celebrities who are sharing their political opinions with us in order to help them to know how to think about a certain political thing, right? When we want to know how to handle our money, we turn to economists, not Jesus. When we want to know how to, raise our kids, we look to the latest research trends. When we want to know so much about the world, we look to the quote-unquote experts of our world to help us do this. And I'm not saying there's nothing that we can learn from these people, right? That's not my point. My point is that we don't think Jesus has that much to offer us. We don't really include his voice and give it priority over the other voices that we're taking in to try to help us understand how to be human in the world that we live in. Very few people, I think, believe Jesus has much to teach them, except for on religious-y stuff, right? On like very specifically Christian-y type stuff, or how to get to heaven one day. But I think that view seriously misses God's purpose in becoming human. And to the people that take him seriously and live it out, aided by Jesus' help, we can now help him to model that wisdom to the rest of the world for the purposes of what he tells us is flavoring it and preserving it. Okay, living in a way that leads us toward God in every aspect of our lives, which is what we would call true wisdom as Christians, and away from that prison of sin that he has liberated us from, so that we never have to go back again. Now, I think it's a big claim to make to say that Christians are the people who should show everybody how to be human, right? I know that you might think of some Christians and think, yikes, like, I'm not supposed to be like them, am I? Like, I don't think that living like the way that they do or taking what they have to say seriously is probably best, right? I'm sure that cringe that you have, when you think of people like that, it's earned. You've got receipts for it, I'm guessing. But a favorite image of mine here is in terms of what it means to be a pastor. Okay, and something I come back to a lot is a pastor is a wounded healer, right? They're someone who has the same disease that they're trying to cure in their patients, right? Someone who understands what it's like to have this sickness, who lives with it daily themselves and is taking their own, active steps to try to combat it, right? We would be very happy to have a doctor like that who understood our condition, okay? Now, I think this attitude is helpful for pastors to have, but I also think it's a helpful attitude for all Christians too. I think the wisest thing that we can do is model how to live in unending dependence on our rescuing champion and on the one who continually is perfecting and teaching us and modeling to us what it means to live and be human, and to never, in a sort of deep amount of humility and gratitude, to never outgrow our need for and reliance on him. When that's the mindset that we have, something develops into our character that is hard to create otherwise, and that's humility, right? This is the attitude, I think, of someone learning from Jesus how to live, remembering that they've been rescued from prison, remembering that their own best thinking is what got them there in the first place. And it leads them to not be filled with the kinds of things that people have that tend to keep them stuck in that prison of sin, of pride, of doubling down, of defensiveness, of refusal to own our mistakes in the world. And unfortunately, I think this mindset is embodied by a lot of followers of Jesus as well, ones who don't actually think Jesus has much to teach them about how to live in the world. And when we start there, and using that sort of foundation to build off of and learn and sort of learning and trying to model the rest of what Jesus teaches us, I think we can become the kind of people that Jesus is calling for us to be. So as we close this message here, I have a few questions I want you to think about, kind of going back through several of the different things that we talked about here in this message. Okay, first of all, going back kind of earlier in the message here, something we talked about before and how we see that God has said that, our bodies are good. Right? He's affirmed our goodness by taking on flesh and becoming like us. Right? Do you sometimes despise your body even though God has affirmed its goodness? Right? I just want to encourage you, again, whether you have maybe body image issues or a chronic disease, or you're currently aging and you're frustrated about whatever it is, God has affirmed the goodness of your body even in your frustrations of it by taking on flesh himself and perhaps even struggling with some of those things in his own embodied state. It is good. God has said that his creation is not worth giving up on. It's worth renewing and even becoming one himself. And I just want to encourage you to not despise your own body or hate it because of the ways you might be experiencing that. Okay, secondly here, the second question, am I trying to escape the prison of sin on my own power somehow? Okay, what that might look like for you is trying to manage your sin or foolishness on your own, thinking that eventually you will figure out a way to get out of the prison of sin. You don't need the help of Jesus or God. Okay, the reality is it doesn't work like that. If it did, God wouldn't have had to literally take on human flesh in order to bust us out of prison, but he did, right? Which tells us it is not possible for us to do on our own, right? Maybe you bust out of the prison cell that you're in, but you're just going to end up in another prison cell just like it. You have to deal with the root of the problem, which is what our sin is. And Jesus is the only one who can rescue us from it and deliver us out of it. Okay, finally, am I learning from Jesus, the teacher of the image of God, about what it means to be human? Okay, I think a lot of Christians, we come to this place where, we can answer the second question that I just asked here. Okay, like we understand we have no power to deliver ourselves from sin. We've accepted the grace of our liberator. We've followed him out of prison. But we haven't thought that maybe Jesus has much to teach us about how to live now that we've been busted out of prison again. We thought of him only as our champion and our rescuer. Okay, but Jesus calls us to be more than just believers in him, more than just people who have been set free from sin, right? And so if you are someone who has taken the step of trusting Jesus with your salvation, but you've not taken the step of committing your life to him to become his disciple, his student, to learn from him about how to live now on this side of freedom so that you can be turned into someone who can be salt in the world, maybe this is a moment for you to actually choose to make that decision. Right? A lot of Christians don't actually ever end up taking that step. And that doesn't mean that they don't have, they won't have a life in the kingdom to come one day, but it does mean that they are not going to be able to, in the present, experience what it means to be truly human and to model that in a way that can flavor and preserve the world around us. And I think that's a huge part of why Jesus took on flesh and came down to dwell among us. Right? So make a commitment maybe right now. Make a choice as firm as that initial choice that you made to follow after Jesus, to give your life to him now as a disciple, to commit to giving every part of you to him and trusting that he can teach you and show you how to live in it. And as you do, you will have the image of God restored onto you as you become more and more like Jesus, okay? That's my hope for everyone who follows Jesus and for all of us here at Resurrection City Church. So as we close here, this message, I just want to offer up a prayer for you all before we wrap things up. Lord God, I pray that you would help us to really wrestle with the things that we studied this morning. The idea of you taking on flesh and coming to be human, God, even while retaining what it is that made you fully God, is a radical thing. It's hard to wrap our brains around, Lord. And there's so many depths to the level of meaning of it, God, that we can dive into. But I pray on the things that we talked about here just now, that you would impress those things onto the hearts of the people who are hearing it, Lord. Whether it is maybe a way in which they hate their body, maybe it's a way that they're trying to break out of the prison of sin on their own, God, or maybe it's just in not approaching you and humbling themselves to you to learn as a teacher and believing that you have the keys of the deepest wisdom in the world to offer to us, Lord. I just pray that you would lead us into whatever it is that you want us to know here right now, God. We put it into your hands, and we thank you that you were willing to take on flesh for us, God, and all that came with it, especially your death, God. Most importantly, the death that you that happened to you because of it, God. We thank you, we love you, and we pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.